Hey everybody, so this week we're going to take a look at perspective and measuring. So we are looking at some artists that deal in perspective and measuring and are famous for that for different reasons. So definitely take a look at that. Make sure you're checking out those artists before you start in on the exercise for this week. Okay, so what you're going to do for this assignment is you're going to complete, let's do 5 different measuring drawings for this particular week. So the whole thing with measuring and perspective is that you want to start being able to see things in the proportions that they actually are. Sorry, my infant son is throwing Duplo blocks everywhere in the background, and they're quite loud. But anyways, it's very easy for us to flatten things or draw them as they don't exist in the real world because our brains work in a 3-dimensional environment, but when we look at a drawing, obviously that's translated to 2D, so it's very easy to skew what we're looking at, and not draw it, as it is actually being seen, and that's part of the challenge of drawing. That's what makes it so hard, and what makes people so frustrated. So I think what we'll do is we will start to work with perspective in this exercise, and we'll start thinking about it, and we're going to mostly measure, and then we can work with perspective in relation to a vanishing point a little bit more in a following exercise. So, because I think if you can get the measuring first, the perspective kind of comes a little bit easier. So, I've got some different images here that we're going to look at in relation to perspective and measuring. And the very first image we're going to look at, I think, is this chair. So let me just minimize everything. So you're going to do, I think what we'll do is let's do 5 drawings total. We will do... let me just move this pencil up for a moment. I think what we'll do are 5 drawings total. And so what you can do, whoops, that's not a very good paper. Okay. So what you can do is, oh, I don't like that either. Okay, let me make these a little bit smaller so that they fit. Okay, so that's our 3rd piece of paper down there. So I think what you can do is you can take your first 2 pieces of paper and you can split it so that there's 2 drawings. And what you could do is just fold that piece of paper in half and draw on either side. And so I think for 1, 2, 3, and 4, I would actually focus on objects in the house for these. And then for the last one, we will focus on architecture. Architecture. I really don't think I spelled that correctly. I didn't. Let's just not look at that. How about buildings? Okay. I don't spell very well when I know I'm being recorded or watched, which I'm sure some of you can relate to. Here's little Max. He's upset. He likes to get upset when I'm talking and not paying attention to him. Okay, so outside buildings for number 5, and then we'll make that an entire piece of paper. So, the thing is, when you're looking at things to measure, you want to hold your pencil up to it And when you're measuring for drawing, it's comparing everything in proportions. That's how you're going to get things to be the size that they actually are in the perspective that you're drawing them in. So let's see. Let me start. So I usually will start with one thing on a particular object, and I will compare everything else to that. So what do I mean by that? Well, what you can do is you can hold your pencil in front of you, and this can be your drawing tool. And what you're going to do, now when you do this, you need to sit in the same place when you do the drawing and not move where you're at, because if you move where you're at, then you see the object from a different perspective, and it kind of wrecks everything it is that you're doing. So take note of where the object is and where you're sitting. And if you do have to move or move the object, then you'll know where to move it back. So, here we go, crying, okay. So anyways, what you want to do is you want to hold your pencil up in front of you. And what I mean in terms of measuring, so let's just go ahead and measure this chair. So you're going to hold the pencil up and you're going to say, okay, I'm going to put the end of my pencil, I want to measure how high this front leg is. And you're going to use that to compare everything else. So I've got my pencil up, and what I'm going to do is using your thumb, you're going to make note of where the leg ends. So it begins at the tip of your pencil and it ends, let's say that's your thumb right there. It ends where your thumb is. So we know that this front leg is right here on the pencil, and so we're going to compare everything else to that. And I'll explain what I mean more about that here in just a second. So let me erase where my pretend thumb is. And I am just going to make a line here. Whoops. I'm just going to make a line here like this. Okay, so now I can take my pencil away. And I can measure something else. You know, I'm drawing with my pencil. I don't know. Okay, so now that I know that this is what I'm going to use to measure, I can then measure everything else. So I come over to, let's say the rest of the legs of the chair. So let's see. Okay, so let me see here. I need to erase, all of this so that I can duplicate this layer and move it around as I talk. All right, so this chair, I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this layer. So this chair leg is going to be the basis, and that's going to be my base measurement. So when you're drawing something, you need to pick something, and I usually pick, you know, a smaller element, maybe not the smallest element, but that's what I pick to base my measurements off of for the rest of the drawing. So what I can do then is I can hold my pencil up and I can say, you know, okay, so if this is the length of this leg of the chair, and then I can bring it over here. In fact, let me go ahead and I will just draw right on that pencil. So let's say that's the length. So I'm going to just draw right on that pencil. Oh, whoops, that was the wrong layer. Let's see. Okay, there we go. Nope. Will it not let me? Maybe it won't let me draw directly on that layer. Nope, it doesn't seem to want to let me do that. Well, that's okay. So if we take the pencil, then we know that it's right about, oh, well, it's right above this little triangle with a little bit of space. Okay, So I'm going to bring this over here and I'm going to say, how many of this does it take to make the height of, let's say, this part of the chair? Okay, so I'm going to move that over and I'm going to go ahead and move this to give you a visual. So I say, how many of this does it take? So here I can see that it takes 1 at least. And I'm going to go ahead and duplicate that layer. And then I'm going to say, and it takes, look at that, it's exactly 2. It takes 2. Now this is leaning a different way, right? It's tilted a little bit. But now I know that the height of this part of the chair is 2 times as the one leg here, right? So this is 1 here. This takes 2 of that. So it's all about, for the entire drawing, it's how many of this, whatever it is that you're measuring, how many of that does it take to make that? So now if I go, let's see here, back down, I'm going to duplicate that again. And then I'm going to say, well, how many of this first leg does it take to make the leg next to it? Because it looks like it's a little bit shorter. So let's see what we find. Well, indeed, it is just a little bit shorter. But you can just measure this all with your eye with the pencil. Now, the other part of this is that once you figure out how many of it takes, like how many of this leg it takes, here, let me see. Let me just start drawing on a new layer. I'll pick a new color so it stands out a little bit differently. Maybe like green. So now that we know that it, one of this, it takes 2 of these to make the top here. Then you can start worrying about, well, which way does it need to lean? And that's when, that's the angle of the line that you need to draw. So then you can go and take your pencil and say, well, now I know how long it needs to be. Now, which way is it really leaning? So that's when you can hold your pencil up and you can kind of gauge how much it's leaning in a particular way, and you can replicate that on your paper as much as you possibly can. Yeah, and so you can use this measurement. You can use this measurement anywhere. So we know that this is the leg here. Well, how many of this leg does it take to make this leg on the table in the background? Well, we know that it's just a little bit shorter, right? It's just a little bit short. So then we'll come in and we'll look at the angle and kind of measure that angle. And then you're going to bring your pencil down to your piece of paper and you're going to go ahead and draw that at that angle. And you're going to come in and draw this at this angle. And this. And this. And meanwhile, you can use that first measurement right here for all of your measurements for the rest of the drawing. And getting proportion right is what's going to make your drawing, look realistic. And this takes practice. So you're not going to get this, it takes a lot of practice. So let's look at another picture here. Let me go ahead and just trash all those layers. Okay, so now we have this drawing. So this is a little bit bigger. We're dealing with a little bit more information, more objects. So yeah, let's just take a quick look at, let's see, I'm going to go ahead and make this red again. I think that might be the easiest to see. So what we can do is start by using something as a form of measurement. So when we, I'm going to go ahead and choose this nice corner of the bin here. And so, I'm going to base my measurements, all my measurements off of that. So I'm going to say, well, how many of that does it take to make the rest of everything else? So I'm going to take my tool, and what you're going to find over time is that it's surprising. You'll surprise yourself. If you measure in this way, you're going to realize that things are bigger and smaller than they actually appear to your eyes. So I'm going to come in here and say, okay, well, how many of the side of this corner of this bin does it take to get across? How many does it take to get across the bottom of the window here, windowsill? It's about 1 3/4 ish, somewhere in there. Now you're not going to get these perfect, and that's okay. That's just fine. All right, cool. And so then I can come in and use that to figure out, well, how big is this pink bin compared to the plastic bin? I know in real life that they are different sizes, obviously. So in my mind's wanting me to say that the bin should be drawn bigger, and maybe it should be, but the pink basket is technically closer. So that brings a whole layer of complexity. So that's where I'm going to use my measuring. I'm going to say, well, how does that side of that pink bin compare to the corner of the bin? And look, it's a little bit bigger. So in your mind's eye, you might think, oh, there's no way that the pink side of the bin is bigger than the corner. But it actually is. So, oops. So then you know what is going on. I must have chosen white again. So then I know that I need to tack a little bit more on when I go here. And same for the ball. Like, how big is the ball compared to the corner of this bin? Well, let's just go ahead and find out. I'm just going to turn that. Okay, so the ball's about 1 1/4. The ball's about 1 1/4. Of the side of this bin, that corner. Just to be clear, it's this corner that I'm talking about, for the side of the bin. So that's measuring, and then again, you're going to hold that pencil up and you're going to find your angles and you're going to draw those the best that you can. Another thing that you can do that I highly recommend for this exercise is you can use what's called a viewfinder. And all that is a, let me go ahead and erase that. That's just where you cut a rectangle out of a piece of paper. Usually the rectangle, you want it to try to kind of be the size that your paper is, which is usually a rectangle. So you just take a piece of paper and you cut out a rectangle, and you can kind of look through that and use that as a gauge, a way to help you flatten the drawing onto your paper, if that makes any sense. Okay, so measuring. It's all about how many of this does it take to make that. You choose what your this is, and then you can figure out what all your that's, how tall or long all of the main sides of all of the rest of the stuff in your drawing is. This also goes for houses or larger architecture, which is your last drawing. Okay, so here you've got your house situation. Again, you're going to say how many of this does it take to make that. So for this house in the drawing, I would start with something that's the most prominent and probably maybe more in the foreground, and then base everything off of that. So for the thing that I choose to measure everything else, I'm going to go ahead and pick this side of the garage door. And so I'm going to go through and measure. These are all about the same size. And then I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to come up and say, how many garage doors does it take to get across this top? And then I can kind of double check with looking through my pencil, and you can kind of, what I sort of do is, let me see, did I delete the pencil? Yes, I did. Let me just bring that in again really quick. Okay, so with my pencil here, what you can do is like Okay, so let's look at the garage door. So it ends right under the number on the pencil. So let's just pretend like my thumb is there. And then I can come over here and say, okay, so here's the number. So 1, 2 1/4, right? So then you know that your line up here needs to be 2 1/4 of what you measure down here. And anyways, that's kind of how that works. Of course, I'm changing the size of my pencil digitally, which doesn't help at all. It actually doesn't help at all. But anyways, you won't be doing that when you're out drawing. Okay, so the other thing that I wanted to mention that tends to happen is when you draw your lines in the very beginning, you're going to probably draw them like if you're doing big lines across a big piece of paper like this. Your lines, when you draw the house, let's say you do a big line for that garage, your lines are going to bow. And that's because when we draw with our hands, especially in the beginning, we're inclined to make rounded lines. What you want to practice doing is you want to slowly bring your hand back and forth. Make some light lines at first, and then you're going to slowly make that line, and you're going to get a much straighter line. So don't do this. See that curve? You want to lightly go back and forth, and you're going to get a nice straight line. So that takes some practice and some time as well. Okay, so let's just go over what it is that you're doing again. So you're going to do 5 drawings. You're going to do 4 smaller ones and 1 bigger one. And so I would suggest the types of things that I would suggest drawing are, I would do a chair. A chair is a good place to start. Another really good thing to practice drawing is like if you have a staircase or a hallway. We'll get into more precise perspective a little bit later in the term, but just give it a shot and see how you do in that situation. Another good thing that I would suggest practicing are some cubes or some boxes of some kind. The last thing that I would do for the smaller one is try drawing, maybe set a couple of objects on your kitchen table and do where some of them are closer to you and some of them are farther away, and that'll help you get a sense of how bigger things are in the foreground and they get smaller as they move back. So just some objects on the table. And then for the last one, I want you to go outside of your apartment or house or wherever you're at, and or if you're at work or something, whatever the case is. And I want you to try to draw some architecture. Let's see if I can spell it right this time. So that can be a house, an apartment building, work. And see, so I would say that I would spend about 30 to 45 minutes on each of these. And just work on lines. You don't need to go into value in a lot of detail. Just work on lines and measuring. Work on lines, measuring, and then also angles of line. And trying to record that down. Okay, so sorry, this is a little longer than I wanted it to be. I'm talking a little slower, but given that I record these at home with everybody around me all the time, that's just the way of things. So anyways, as always, let me know if you have any questions. Okay, bye.